Welcome to Godless and Grounded.
When we talk about religion, we often treat it with a kind of hushed reverence, as if these ancient stories are too fragile or too sacred to be looked at under a normal light. But if we pull back the curtain and look at these traditions through the lens of history, logic, and basic human experience, things start to look a little different. Today, we are going to walk through 10 concepts found in various religious traditions that, when you really stop to think about them, feel more like relics of ancient guesswork than divine revelations. We aren't here to shout or be dramatic, we are just going to look at the facts and the logic. Let's start with the idea of the chosen people. Across many faiths, there is this recurring theme that the creator of the entire universe, a being who supposedly spans billions of light years and trillions of galaxies, decided to pick one specific tribe on one tiny speck of dust in the Middle East to be his favorites. From a logical standpoint, this feels incredibly provincial. If a god created all of humanity, why would he communicate through a single group in a way that excludes everyone else for thousands of years? History shows us that this is exactly how human cultures work. Every ancient group thought they were the center of the world. They wrote stories that validated their own land claims and their own social hierarchies. When you look at the geography of religion, you see that your faith is almost entirely determined by where you were born. If the truth were objective and universal, we wouldn't see these hard borders where one universal truth ends and another begins just because you crossed a mountain range. Next, we have the concept of original sin or inherited guilt. The idea is that because two people thousands of years ago ate a piece of fruit they weren't supposed to, every infant born today is inherently broken or dirty in the eyes of the Creator. In any other context, we would recognize this as deeply immoral. We don't put children in jail for the crimes of their great-grandparents. Our entire modern sense of justice is built on individual responsibility. If a god is the ultimate source of justice, it seems strange that he would operate on a system of blood guilt that punishes the innocent for the mistakes of the ancestors. It's much more likely that this was a psychological tool used by early religious leaders to create a sense of need. Then there is the issue of prayer and divine intervention. Think about the sheer scale of the universe. We live in a cosmos where stars explode, galaxies collide, and black holes swallow entire solar systems. Yet we are told that this same cosmic force is deeply concerned with the outcome of a high school football game, or whether someone finds their car keys in the morning. When you look at the statistics, prayer has never been shown to have a measurable effect on reality that exceeds the margin of error or the placebo effect. In fact, large-scale studies on intercessory prayer have shown that people who know they are being prayed for sometimes have worse medical outcomes due to performance anxiety. It seems more plausible that prayer is a form of self-soothing or meditation that people mistake for a two-way conversation. If a god is going to let thousands of children die of preventable diseases every single day, but steps in to help a singer win a Grammy, that's not a divine plan. That's a script for a very confusing movie. Fourth on our list is the concept of eternal punishment for finite crimes. Let's look at the math. Even if a person lived a life of pure villainy for 80 years, an eternity of torture is an infinitely disproportionate response. Eternity is a very long time. After 1 billion years of fire, you haven't even started your sentence. No human judge, no matter how harsh, would ever suggest such a thing. It's an idea born out of extreme human fear and the desire for ultimate revenge. It's also a very effective way to keep a population in line through terror. If you can't prove your point with evidence, you can always use the threat of a never-ending basement of horrors to stop people from asking questions. Moving on, we have the problem of evil, combined with the idea of an all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-loving deity. These three things cannot logically exist at the same time. If a god knows about suffering and can stop it but chooses not to, he isn't all-loving. If he wants to stop it but can't, he isn't all-powerful. Usually the response to this is free will. But free will doesn't explain childhood leukemia or tsunamis or earthquakes. A child dying of a parasitic worm in their eye has nothing to do with human free will. That's a design flaw. If the world was designed by an intelligent engineer, we would have to conclude that the engineer either has a very cruel streak. Sixth, let's talk about the reliability of holy books as historical documents. Many people treat these texts as the literal word of a god. But when we look at the history of how these books were put together, we see a very human process. These stories were passed down through oral tradition for decades, or even centuries before being written down. They were translated, edited, and redacted by committees of men with political agendas. We find contradictions on almost every page, from the number of animals on the ark to the specific details of a resurrection. If a message is so important that your eternal soul depends on it, why deliver it through a medium as unreliable as ancient, translated, contradictory paperwork? Number 7 is the idea of animal sacrifice and blood atonement. If you look back at ancient religions, including the roots of the major ones today, there is a weird obsession with killing animals to please a god. Why would a being who created the entire animal kingdom want to smell burning goat fat? It sounds exactly like what it was. A practice from ancient agrarian societies who thought they had to pay the gods for rain or good harvests. The idea that blood must be shed for forgiveness is a primitive concept that belongs to the Bronze Age, not to a sophisticated understanding of morality or physics. 8th, we have the God of the gaps. Throughout history, humans have used God to explain what they didn't understand. Why does it thunder? God is angry. Why did the crops fail? God is punishing us. As science has advanced, the territory that God occupies has shrunk. We now know about germs, tectonic plates, and the Big Bang. We no longer need a supernatural explanation for the weather or the movement of the planets. It seems that God is always just over the next hill of scientific ignorance. 9th is the bizarre focus on human sexuality and diet. It is fascinating that the creator of billions of galaxies is deeply concerned with whether or not you eat shellfish, wear 2 different types of fabric, or who you choose to love. These rules often reflect the specific cultural anxieties of the people who wrote them. For example, avoiding certain foods in a desert climate without refrigeration makes practical sense for survival. Turning those survival tips into divine commands for all of eternity is a human invention. A cosmic being wouldn't care about your dinner plate. Ancient tribal leaders worried about hygiene certainly would. Finally, we have the idea of faith as a virtue. We are told that believing something without evidence is a good thing. In any other area of life, we call that gullibility or even delusion. If a car salesman asks you to buy a car without looking at it or seeing it run, and tells you that having faith in the car is a virtue, you would walk away. Why is it that in the most important questions of existence, we are told to turn off our critical thinking skills? If something is true, it should be able to withstand the most intense scrutiny. The fact that religion requires faith suggests that it doesn't have the evidence to stand on its own 2 feet. When you look at these 10 points, you see a pattern. These aren't divine mysteries. They are the fingerprints of ancient humans trying to make sense of a scary, confusing world. They used the tools they had, which were storytelling, tribalism, and fear. But we live in a different world now. We have better tools. We can look at the stars and see physics, not myths. We can look at history and see the evolution of ideas. It's okay to let go of these absurdities and embrace the world as it actually is, beautiful and complex and understandable through reason. One final thing to consider is the sheer geography of belief, which acts as a massive reality check on the idea of a single true faith. If you were born in ancient Scandinavia, you would have lived and died being absolutely certain that Odin and Thor governed the skies and that your bravery determined your place in Valhalla. If you were born in the Indus Valley, you would have seen the world through a completely different cycle of reincarnation and karma. Today, if you are born in Riyadh, you are almost certainly going to be a Muslim, and if you are born in Rome, you are almost certainly going to be a Catholic. This shows us that religion is not a universal truth that people discover through reason or divine light, but rather a cultural inheritance passed down like a language or a local recipe. It is incredibly unlikely that out of thousands of religions in human history, the one that just happens to be dominant in your specific hometown at this specific moment in time is the only correct one while everyone else is deluded. When you realize that every person on earth feels the exact same spiritual certainty about their own conflicting gods, you start to see that this inner witness is actually just a product of human psychology and social conditioning. The most logical conclusion is that we are all just looking at the same blank canvas and painting our own cultural reflections onto it. If you read ancient texts, miracles were everywhere. Seas were parting, people were walking on water, and the sun was stopping in the sky. These were massive, undeniable events that would have altered the course of human history and physics. However, as our ability to document and verify information has improved, the miracles have become suspiciously small and vague. Today, a miracle is someone surviving a car crash or a cancer going into remission after months of chemotherapy. While these are wonderful events, they aren't violations of the laws of nature. It's strange that a god who used to perform stadium-sized wonders has now retreated to appearing on pieces of burnt toast or in the patterns of marble floors. This suggests that miracles were never actually happening. Instead, people in the past simply didn't have the scientific literacy to distinguish between a rare natural event and a supernatural one. When we lacked an understanding of probability and coincidence, everything we didn't understand looked like a sign from above. Now that we have a camera in every pocket, the big miracles have disappeared, which tells us a lot about the reliability of the original stories. We should also talk about the idea of the soul and what it actually means in the face of modern neuroscience. Most religions teach that there is a non-physical you that lives inside your body like a pilot in a cockpit. They claim this soul holds your memories, your personality, and your sense of right and wrong, and that it survives after your brain stops working. But everything we know about the brain contradicts this. We know that if you damage a specific part of the brain, a person's personality can completely change. You can go from being a kind, soft-spoken person to being aggressive and impulsive just because of a tumor or a physical injury. We can use chemicals to change how you feel, what you remember, and even what you believe. If the soul is the seat of who you are, why is it so easily manipulated by physical matter? If your personality, your memory, and your consciousness can be altered or erased by a physical blow to the head, there is no reason to believe those things will somehow remain intact once the entire brain has turned to dust. The soul appears to be an ancient way of describing the complex electrical activity of the brain, an activity that ceases when the biological engine stops running. Then there is the strange logic of prophecy. People often point to fulfilled prophecies as proof of the divine, but if you look closely, these prophecies are almost always incredibly vague or self-fulfilling. If I predict that there will be a great war in the East, eventually I will be right, because humans have been fighting wars in the East for thousands of years. Many religious prophecies are written in such poetic, metaphorical language that they can be twisted to fit almost any event after it has already happened. Furthermore, we see cases where the writers of later religious texts were clearly aware of the earlier prophecies and intentionally wrote their stories to fulfill them. It's like a person reading a script and then walking onto the stage to perform the actions. It doesn't prove they have magical powers. It just proves they can read. If a god truly wanted to prove his existence through prophecy, he could have given us something specific and useful, like the formula for penicillin or a warning about a specific natural disaster with a date and time, rather than riddles about beasts with 7 heads. Another absurdity is the concept of an infinite being who demands worship. Think about the psychology of that for a second. We generally consider a human who demands constant praise and gets angry when they don't get it to be deeply insecure or narcissistic. The idea of a jealous god who punishes people for not acknowledging his greatness feels much more like a human king from 3,000 years ago than a cosmic intelligence. A truly advanced being would likely have as much interest in our worship as we have in the worship of an ant colony. The requirement for worship serves a human purpose. It builds community and reinforces the power of religious institutions, but it makes very little sense as a divine necessity. Consider the idea that the universe was made specifically for us. This is called the fine-tuning argument, and it's often used to suggest that the constants of physics were set just right so that humans could exist. But this is like a puddle waking up in the morning and thinking, "This hole I'm in fits me perfectly. It must have been made just for me." In reality, we evolved to fit the universe, not the other way around. The universe is actually incredibly hostile to life. Most of it is a cold, lethal vacuum. Even on our own planet, most of the surface is salt water we can't drink, and huge portions are frozen or burning deserts. We exist in a tiny, fragile sliver of habitability. To say the universe was designed for humans is like saying a massive cathedral was built specifically for the sake of a single microscopic speck of dust on one of the floor tiles. It's a view rooted in an ancient time when we thought the Earth was the center of everything. Now that we know the true scale of the cosmos, the idea that it was all a giant stage play for our benefit seems less like a holy truth and more like human ego. When we look at the idea of divine revelations, we have to address the massive problem of timing and why a supposed message for all of humanity would be delivered in such a localized and primitive way. For the vast majority of human history, People lived and died without ever hearing about the specific gods or prophets that modern religions claim are the only way to salvation. If a god wanted to save everyone, why wait until the middle of human history to show up in a tiny corner of the globe where most people couldn't even read or write? Millions of people in the Americas, Australia, and Asia lived for thousands of generations without any access to these essential truths. This means that a divine being would have to be comfortable with billions of people failing a test they didn't even know they were taking. This makes much more sense if you view religion as a slow-moving cultural export. It spread through trade routes and conquests, just like languages and technology, rather than falling from the sky as a universal truth meant for every human heart. Then there is the concept of holy relics and the bizarre value placed on physical objects that supposedly have magical properties. Throughout history, churches and temples have claimed to possess things like the bones of saints, pieces of a wooden cross, or even the hair of a prophet. People travel thousands of miles to touch these things, believing they can heal diseases or grant blessings. But if you look at the history of these objects, they are almost always proven to be fakes. During the Middle Ages, there were enough pieces of the true cross in Europe to build an entire fleet of ships. Carbon dating and historical analysis consistently show that these items are much younger than they are claimed to be. The fact that religion relies so heavily on these physical gimmicks shows a deep-seated human need for something tangible to hold on to. It's a form of superstition that treats the universe like a vending machine, where you can trade a pilgrimage or a prayer to a bone for a favor. It's far more likely that these relics were manufactured by clever people who knew that pilgrims brought money and prestige to their local cities. Almost every religion paints a picture of the next world that looks suspiciously like a perfected version of the current one, or at least a version that rewards people for following the rules of the present society. If you are a good subject and don't rebel against the king, you get a crown in heaven. If you give money to the temple now, you will have riches in the afterlife. This pie-in-the-sky approach has been used for centuries to keep people from demanding justice and equality in the here and now. It's a very effective way to get people to accept suffering and poverty. You just tell them that their misery is a test, and that the real life starts after they die. When you analyze these promises, you see that they serve the interests of those in power. By moving the reward to a place where no one can ever come back and verify it, religious systems created a perfect, unfalsifiable product. It's a business model that sells a solution to a problem that it created itself, with a delivery date that is always conveniently after you are no longer around to complain. Lastly, we have to consider the strange holy fascination with suffering, and the idea that pain is somehow noble or pleasing to a creator. Throughout history, we see traditions of self-flagellation, extreme fasting, and the glorification of martyrs who died in horrific ways. There is a recurring theme that the more you suffer, the holier you are. From a biological and logical perspective, this is completely backwards. Pain is a signal evolved to tell us that something is wrong and that we should move towards safety and health. To flip this on its head and claim that a loving God wants his creations to endure agony, to prove their devotion, is a very dark human invention. It reflects the mindset of ancient societies where life was brutal and short, and people needed to find a divine reason for their inevitable pain to make it bearable. Instead of solving the causes of suffering, these systems turned suffering into a merit badge. When you step back and look at it, a being that requires you to hurt yourself or ignore your basic needs just to show loyalty doesn't sound like a source of ultimate love. It sounds like a reflection of the harsh, unforgiving environments in which these religions were first born.